Welcome to the world of chess. My name is Levi Rosman. I'm an international master from New York City, hence the name Gotham. And in this video, I want to give you all the tools you'll need to learn chess and navigate it as a beginner. I'm covering 5 major concepts that I've picked out. They're right here. We'll talk about the board and the setup, and obviously all of the pieces, how they move, and how many points they're worth. Then we'll talk about their interactions. That means what pieces have what vision, attacking, capturing, creating threats, and defending them. That will flow into number 3, which is checks and checkmate. That's talking specifically about the king, because checkmate is the goal of the game. In the 4th category, I will show you some basic opening ideas, how to start a game with white and with black, certain traps to avoid falling into. The middle game will be tactics and strategy, the 2 major branches, and talk a little bit about endgames as well. What are the most important endgames for beginners to know? And last but not least, we'll just talk a little bit about a study plan. All right, sounds good. Let's go. First things first, a chessboard is an 8x8 square which has files, which are the A file, the B file, the C file, and so on, and ranks, the first rank, the second rank, etc. Boards with coordinates, as you see here, have A1, B1, and so on. White starts on 1 and 2, and if you don't have those coordinates, the bottom right-hand corner should be a light square, okay? Each side has 8 pawns. They go on the 2nd and 7th rank respectively. Then the back rank of pieces, you can put the rooks or the castle-like structures in the corners, followed by the knights or the horsies, however you want to call them. The bishops go next, the ones with the pointed hats. And in the middle, you've got the royalty, the king and the queen. The easiest way to remember how to put the king and the queen is that the white queen likes to have a white dress with white shoes. She likes to stand on the same color square. The black queen likes a black dress with black shoes. So the black queen will stand on the dark square, and the white queen will stand on a light square. The kings will obviously stand adjacent. Now, kings, you can also remember, are on the E file, and the queens are on the D file. That's one more way to remember it. Now, this is a lot of pieces. So what I'm going to do when I'm teaching you about piece movements is I'm going to cut back a lot. Now, hopefully all of the games that you play look like this. Well, you will be playing with the white pieces, hopefully, in this position. You're up 35 points of material. Let's start with the pawns. Pawns are worth 1 point. They only move forward. They do not move backwards. On their first move, pawns can go up 2 in one go, like this. However, after that, they can only move forward 1 square. If a pawn makes it all the way to the end of the board, you can promote it to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. Even if you already have the 2 knights, for example, that you start with, you can have a third one. One thing about pawns, the way they capture is not forward, it's diagonally 1 square. So for example, in this position, the white pawn would, oops, sorry, wrong arrow. The white pawn would capture the black pawn like this. That would be the capture of a pawn, okay? Now, there's one other bonus rule of pawns that I'll include here, just for the sake of including it. It will confuse you, and you might be tempted to leave this video, but that rule is called en passant. There is this special rule, I did not invent it, so please don't hate me, which looks something like a software glitch, and it goes like this. If an enemy pawn moves 2 squares, okay, 2 squares, and stands side by side with your pawn, you can take that pawn via something called en passant, in passing, only on this move. If you wait 1 turn, you can't do it, and it looks like this. You say, Levi, I'm only like 5 minutes into this video, you're already confusing me, I don't feel safe. Listen, it's just my rule, it's just my job to report the rules, okay? That's the only special rule about pawns. Okay, all good? Terrific. Now, let's move to knights and bishops together, because those are called the minor pieces, and they're worth 3 points. Okay? Bishops are very simple. They can go forward and backward, diagonally, on their own color. So a light squared bishop, that's how it moves. A dark squared bishop, in this case, would go all the way down here if it could. But it can go to any of these squares. It can go 1 square, 3 squares, whatever. Knights. Knights are the most unique. They move in little L's. So that would mean up 2 over 1. okay? Or up 1 over 2. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like this. 1, 2, turn. or 1-2 turn, or 1-2 turn, or 1-2 turn. Knights can also go backwards. And the cool thing about knights is they can jump over other pieces. So this knight doesn't have to ask permission. It can just directly move to this square with no issues. Now, of course, you can't take your own pieces, so don't try to do that, but it could go 2 and 1. Now, obviously, knights are a little bit slower, right? It would take a very different amount of time for these two pieces to get to the other side of the board. They're each worth 3. Rooks and queens are actually quite simple. No more fancy L's. Rooks go up, down, left, right, and they're worth 5 points in any direction that they want. So like this, like this, like this. Sorry, not in any direction that they want. I should say however much distance that they want to cover. Queens are like a rook and a bishop combined. Queens are worth 9 points, and they can go all the way here, 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 all the way this way, and this way. Whatever one of those squares that queen chooses to go to, it can go to. It is super powered. You want to keep the queen. It's your most powerful attacking piece, but it shouldn't do damage early, because you will be fighting against a fully loaded position. Last but not least, we have the kings. Kings are like queens, except they're kind of not at all. They can go in any direction that they want, but only one square. So a queen can go as much as it wants. A king can only move 1. One more bonus rule for you, which is castling. Okay? I said I might confuse you a little bit. Castling is a move in chess. It's when you move 2 pieces at the same time. It's your king and your rook. Okay? And what that looks like is, let's say, in this kind of a position, so it's white's move, the king will go 2, and the rook will hop right over next to the king. You can obviously only do that when the king and rook can see each other. And one more thing about that, you can only play the move castles as long as you haven't moved the king or the rook that you're trying to use for castling. You'll learn later in the opening section why castling is important. It's an important move because it gets the king out of the middle, hiding it in a little vacation home on the side. For now, don't be confused. If you're confused, it's okay. All things will be explained later. Let's talk a little bit about how the pieces interact on the chessboard. The way I want you to think about this, okay, is vision of a piece. What does that mean? Well, let's start with the queen. This queen sees all the way down here, but it's all empty squares. The board is split into emptiness, empty squares, and physical pieces. A piece that is there, that we can see it, okay? So first things first, the queen sees the pawn. Who else sees the pawn for black? Not for white, but for black. You look around, the rook sees the pawn. So taking this pawn would be a terrible move because the rook would respond with a capture. That's a capture of a pawn. That's what that's called. Taking a pawn, capturing a pawn. The rook would take back. We lose 9 points in that trade. That's how I want you to think about it. We get 1. 1 for 9 is not a good trade. What else can we see? Our bishop can see this knight. Who else? This bishop sees this knight. The bishops don't see each other because the knight is in the way. So if white in this position play the move bishop takes knight and bishop takes bishop, that's a fair trade. That's 3 for 3. That's not a bad deal. Okay? That's how I want you to think about it when you're first starting out. 3 for 3? That's fine. That's more than okay. Now, what does this bishop see? Bonus question. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Losing 5 would not be good unless we got more than that in return. Or close, like 4. 4 points. Now, our rook here defends that. That's what that's called. That's called defense. Same way that rook is protecting that pawn or defending that pawn. We're defending, but that's not a fair trade. So in this position, let's move this rook here, for example. On this square, look who we see. Oh, and the queen cannot come down and take us. That's a very important thing because the rook is protecting the rook, right? Now here, how about this? What if, let's say black plays a move, queen f6. The queen sees the knight. Is it attacking the knight? No, it's not because we're protecting it. That would not be a good decision for black to take. And one more thing. Let's say in this position, black plays this move. Can we capture that bishop? That bishop is trying to win our queen, and many beginners go, oh God, oh God, oh, my queen's in danger. But hold on a second. Can't we just take? Is that protected by anything? No. That's how I want you to start thinking about the game as you play it. Is anything protecting that? Am I attacking it? The point value system, okay? Because this queen is not attacking this pawn because it's protected. But if no one was protecting that pawn, then it would be. Hopefully that kind of begins to cultivate the thought process of how pieces interact in a chess game. One thing hidden in all this is the fact that white can play a move, queen c4, and that hits the king. That's called a check. This next part will cover just checks and checkmate. So we'll move ahead to this position. Here it's white to move. White has a million ways to attack this king. A check is an attack on the king. It threatens to capture the king. In chess, there is no capturing of the king. The king has to escape danger. So for example, let's say the white queen goes here. Check. Well, the king would slide out of danger. Otherwise, we would take the king. And so on. But what if we put the queen here? That's a check. The king, anywhere it moves, remains in check. Which means that we have put the enemy king in a check that is unavoidable. Nothing that black can do. That is checkmate. And we would win the game. Checkmate happens at the beginning of the game sometimes. Sometimes all the way at the end. Okay, sometimes in the middle. But checkmate will ultimately decide the game. One little more, gotta include a little bonus here. This position is a little bit different. Let's say it's black's move here. Black's move, not white's move. If it's white's move, we give a check. But if it's black's move, can black move legally? No, because black cannot put the king in danger. That's not allowed. You can't give up your king. But is black in check? Is the queen threatening the king right now to take it? No, because the queen doesn't actually see the king. It just doesn't. The queen does not see the king. This is called stalemate. Stalemate is when one side has no legal moves, but is not in check. The king is not in danger. That is a draw. Not a win for one side, but a draw, a tie. You say, Levy, that's stupid. What if I'm up 37,000 points of material, I accidentally stalemate? Tough luck. It's a draw. We're working on it. It's December 1st, 2020. If the rules change in the future, I'll make an update video. But as far as it goes, this is still it. I'm very sorry. Now, as I said, checkmate can happen at the beginning of the game, right? So the fastest checkmate known to, well, chess is called the two-move checkmate. And essentially, it's this. I mean, I'm just going to show it to you so you know it. But on the second move, black can play queen here if white starts out with pawn to f3 and pawn to g4. And now you're in check, and check is unavoidable. You don't always have to move your king when you are in check. Okay, you can also block the check if it's possible. You can also capture whatever is attacking your king. But in this particular case, you can't. Now, I promised you that we would look at openings, and we're going to do that now. How do you start the game of chess? Here you are, you're sitting there, you studied this video. All right, Levy, let's do something. Let's go. In the beginning of the game, you want to take control of the center of the board. This area. For advanced beginners, maybe a little rectangle. Best way to do that is to put pawns in the center. So that might mean something like e4 or d4. Both are okay. All right? Now, just for instructive purposes, I'm going to do nothing with black. I'm going to move the knight back and forth to give us the most perfect setup possible. If you can put a second pawn in the center, you should do that without it getting captured. If you can do it, make sure you can do it, okay? I'm going to continue to do these things over here. Next come the knights. Again to the center of the board. Better, because from there they control more squares. Knights on the side, they don't really do that. Okay? Now I'm still doing my thing over here. Two knights. That's usually the best way to go if you can. The bishops will go next. All right? And one thing that you have to remember, Bishop can go to c4 or to d3 or even to e2 as long as you're getting out the bishop. You want to give everybody a turn in the opening before you start repeating moves. You don't want to move the same piece 4 or 5 times. That's not how chess works. You don't need to reinvent the wheel at the beginning of a chess game because we already kind of know how to do that. These are the secrets. So, again, black is just doing goofy stuff. And I'll show you, obviously, a legitimate game after this. Now, I'll put the second bishop just... Don't want the bishop to feel left out. Remember that castling rule? Get the king out of the center of the board. 2 squares with the king, and the rook will jump right over and be adjacent. Okay? I want you to remember to do this if you try to do it at home. On a computer, you can just kind of drag this over here and it will happen. Or on a tablet or a mobile phone, but over the board, you have to know how to do this. Then you can bring the queen up and connect the rooks. That's kind of called the golden moves of chess. Now, here's the problem. If you have a strong opponent and they just do the same thing, which is probably what will happen, you can't quite just go put 2 pawns in the center because they will take. Oops. And it's not a good idea to bring your queen out very early because the queen can be attacked. All right? Black just has way too much going on. Both sides have too many pieces to bring in your most powerful piece. Your most powerful piece will get taken. Everything in the position is protected very well. So, if they play e5, you can delay this move for now. You don't have to always go 2 squares. You can still get the knight out, attacking this pawn. Let's say they go knight c6. This is very classical. They defend. Now bishop to c4. Or the second knight. The second knight. Bishop to c4 would be another way. Castling, knight out, pawn out, and so on. The difficult thing about openings is that when you're first learning, you're very tentative. You're thinking about your own moves. All right, I got to get all these pieces to their right squares. I better not lose any of the pieces. And also, beginners do all sorts of wild stuff in the opening. They don't always follow the rules. You know? I will teach you the 4-move checkmate momentarily, but beginners do crazy things in the opening. So if your opponent is out here doing things like bringing the queen out, you're like, wait, can't I just take that? Yes, of course you can. A free queen is very good, even if it's not free. Queen is good. Take a queen if you can in the beginning of the game. Be vigilant. You're already in battle. It's not just about positioning. In the beginning of the game, your pieces are coming out and they're fighting for squares as much as they are also targeting the opponent's pieces. So as soon as move 1, already be vigilant. What can you capture? What's a fair trade? What's a free piece? What's hanging material? And so on. There's certain openings that you can look up. The biggest difference between openings in chess are openings that are called theoretical and openings that are called setups. Setup openings, for example, like the London system with the white pieces, you play d4. I don't know why this is here. You play d4, and then you play the bishop out, and you kind of play the same way every time. d4 and bishop f4, the London system, is something that you can do the same every game. Basically every game. Unless black does something totally crazy. And loses a bunch of pieces early on. With the king's pawn, you can't really... Because when you play the king's pawn, here there's a lot of different ways that black can play. I mean, I know it doesn't seem like it if you're just starting out, but black can play the French defense. Black can play king's pawn. Black can play the Sicilian defense. Shout out to Beth Harmon. Caro-Kann defense. So you have to know what to do a little bit about everyone, and you add your knowledge incrementally. But one thing, I'll flip this to black, is this. The early queen attacks. And in particular, something called the scholar's mate. If you're not careful with the black pieces, you will immediately misunderstand what this move is all about. White wants to play bishop c4 and checkmate you. That would look something like this. Bishop c4, queen h5. Why does this work? This is the only square near the king, which is only protected by the king. Yes? Only protected by the king. Which means, if white is able to land the queen on f7 or f2, if you're playing with black, and the queen is protected by the bishop, it's mate. You lose. 4 moves, done. Game is over. So how do you avoid this happening? Every beginner has fallen for this at some point. Something on f7, okay? How do you avoid this happening? Well, let's say you play, you play e4, e5, and they play queen h5. First things first, this is not an attack here. It is an attack on this pawn, though. So don't go g6, because they will take, and that will be a double attack of your king and your rook. Very common trap. What I recommend, if you play pawn e5, is to always develop your queen's knight next. Whatever white plays, unless, of course, white offers you a pawn capture in the center of the board. That's why you put the pawn there, is to capture. So bring out the queen's knight. That defends the pawn, and if they go to mate you, make sure they can't take this. Defend it. With the queen, for example. With the queen, for example. Now you can block because your knight protects your central pawn. Okay? There's a lot of ways to not fall into this so fast. At the same time, if they bring out their bishop on the second move, then you can also play knight f6. Now the queen cannot go here because your knight covers that. Little tricks to avoid losing very quickly. Otherwise, a standard game of chess might look something like this. This is what a lot of beginner games look like. And this will flow into something called the middle game, which is the ocean in which chess players try to swim, but it's not so simple to do. The middle game is split into two things: strategic play and tactical play. Beginners' games are decided 95% of the time with tactics. I will give you a very simple example of what a tactic is. A tactic is a forcing move or sequence of them that guarantees gain of material. So look at the position that you have in front of you. How do we get this knight with the king? That would be a three-step process. 1, 2, 3. That's a bit more strategic in nature. In positions with many more pieces on the board, strategic plans take 2 or 3 moves. Oftentimes, it means rerouting a piece to the other side of the board to make it more active, gaining very good control of a square. Tactics are immediate. They are the most forcing moves in the game. They make your opponent react. So for example, here there's something called a double attack or a fork. The queen can go here, attacking the king and the knight. That will guarantee that you win the knight. Guaranteed, because the king has to move, and then we would take the knight. There's one other way to do this, and that would be here, because that's all the same. Right? That's how powerful the queen is. Another kind of another kind of tactic, I should say, is a pin. And a pin means a diagonal or a vertical or horizontal attack on a piece that can't move. It just can't move. This knight cannot move because we would win the king. And we cannot capture a king. Look, it literally won't let me move. This is a pin on the knight to the king. This can also happen in reverse. There's some debate as to skewer, x-ray, pin, but the concept is all the same. And by the way, if it was black's move in this position, black can fork or double attack the queen and the king themselves. Tactics are so important. You should do as many of them as possible. There are workbooks. My favorite one is 1001 Chess Exercises for Beginners. They did not sponsor this video. I just recommended that book. That book goes chapter by chapter. Every single kind of tactic, deflection, pin, discovered attack. There's a lot of different tactics, a lot of different ways to solve these tactics. That's what you should do. Chess is so much about pattern recognition and puzzle solving because you don't need to reinvent the wheel when you play the game of chess. For endgames, as we move to endgames, endgames are a series of positions toward the end, obviously, of chess games, which you should know how to win. So for example, king and one pawn versus king endgames. That's something that without any knowledge you would not be able to figure out yourself. That's something that you can pick up and learn. There's a book, 100 Endgames You Must Know, for example. It's a great book. But more importantly for beginners, is how to checkmate, for example, with a queen and a king versus a king. Like, that is something you should be able to do like that. Or a ladder checkmate. A ladder checkmate is even easier. So when you have a queen and another queen, or a queen and a rook, for example, or two rooks. And that's useful for positions like this. Like, let's say you get a position like this in a game with queen and pawn. You go, wait, remember that rule? I can go make a second queen. It's much easier to win with two queens versus a king. And a ladder checkmate would look, for example, like this. Let's say we promote a second queen. Just, you know, you do a drill on ladder checkmate. It's when you use both of your pieces to cut the enemy king laterally and walk it to the other side of the board. So for example, that might look something like this. Queen b5 cuts the king laterally. And now your queens alternate which row they're going to control. Or rank, right? There you go. That's something that you just pick up as a beginner. You go practice some ladder checkmates. You go practice how to checkmate with king and queen. I will give you kind of the 2-minute rundown. I don't know if it will be useful for you. Pawn, please disappear. Thank you. The easiest way to checkmate with just the queen is to put the queen in what's called knight opposition. What does that mean? That means if this piece was a knight, it would be attacking the king. Now, you copy everything black does. If black moves 1 square to the left, you move 1 square to the left. If black moves 1 square diagonally backwards, you go the same way. And you get this king to one of the final rows. If the king gets locked on one of those final rows, you make sure the king cannot escape. So like I said, 1 square this way, 1 square this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. Oh! The king's on the back row. Now it's time to bring our king. So for example, here, 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 here. The king will prevent the enemy king from escaping. The king cannot put itself in danger, obviously, with our king there, because we would capture it. So for example, now we deliver either this checkmate or the checkmate I like to call in your face. This is a check, and the king is protecting the queen. Otherwise, if our king was back here, the king can just take. The king can capture things for free, of course. But in this case, the king would be defending the queen. So that's the use of endgames as a beginner. You learn how to checkmate, for example, with just the queen. You learn how to checkmate with just the rook. There's all sorts of resources on the internet for things like that. But the point of this video is to point you in the right direction. You need to learn basic checkmates and ultimately just how to win a position where you have like a huge lead. Okay? Huge lead in material. Trade the pieces down, get it to an endgame, get a ladder checkmate. Checkmate somebody with a queen. I told you that at the end of all this, I would recommend what I think is the best and kind of most reliable study plan. I get asked this question all the time, especially now with so many more chess fans around the world because of the Queen's Gambit. You know, it's December 1st, like I said, 2020. So whenever you're watching in the future, if you've made it this far in the video, you want to know how do you get better at chess. There's a ton of books. There's a ton of resources. A few days after recording this, I will have a beginner's course. It will be linked in the comments. You want to learn a few openings with white and with black. You want to be confident in how you start the game. Personally, I don't recommend playing computers or bots. I recommend going to play people online or over the board. I recommend longer games, 10-minute games, 15-minute games. I recommend playing just a few games a day and then analyzing. And when you analyze with a computer, it won't always be so easy to understand. And frankly, there's no clear advice I can give on how to understand certain engine recommendations. Because it doesn't speak to you, frankly. When you look at a game with an engine, you need to look for your one-move mistakes. You need to, like, oh, I blundered that piece. That's what I did. I just literally left the piece hanging. Okay? How did my opening go? Did I fall for a trap? Try not to fall for the same mistake 2 times. Have your endgames down and start slowly adding a little bit of information to your endgames. Learn how to checkmate with a rook. Okay? Learn a king and pawn endgame, for example. keep adding information there. And for the puzzle solving, quality over quantity. Do 10 puzzles in one day, spend as much time on them as you need, get them all correct. When you solve puzzles, you should look to solve them with a process of checks, captures, attacks. Those are the most forcing moves in chess, moves that they have to respond to. I have videos on puzzle solving. So if you ever want to watch videos on puzzle solving and how to improve at that, there's content out there for you as well. But that's how you get better. So you want to do 10 puzzles, get 10 correct. Don't do 30 puzzles and only get 10 correct. Go for 100%. That way you understand the pattern, kind of immerse yourself in it, and that's how you would improve. Many people who start the game as adults gain hundreds of rating points on chess.com or wherever they play, just playing like that. I don't really have much else to add. I think I've given you just about enough. We're 30 minutes into this video. This is already a lot of information to intake. If any of you have questions, start conversations in the comments. I'm sure people would be more than happy to jump in and answer about books, training regimens, and so on and so forth. That's basically it. Welcome once again to chess. And if there's any other content that you'd like to see on my channel besides the playlist that I have on these subjects, let me know, like I said, in the comments below. Enjoy. Welcome to the 64 Squares.